my first trip ever to Alaska was for an interview with the Palmer Church. So I looked at everything critically, thinking I could live here. And it didn't take me long to be super impressed. I walked out of the airport and there were these mountains. You can see them from downtown Anchorage. And then we get driving up to Palmer and we cross some rivers and we see some lakes. And there's this big open valley, this awesome view with mountains everywhere. And I thought, this place is incredible. There was just this one nature feature that left me unimpressed. I have this distinct memory of driving through the Palmer Hayflats for the first time and saying to my wife, if we move here, I'm going to miss the trees. See, we came from Western Washington, and that's where I grew up. And in Western Washington, there are these evergreen trees that are everywhere, and they're big. And you have to understand how Alaskan trees look to someone from Washington, because the trees weren't evergreen, and they weren't everywhere, and they weren't big. We came in April, and the leaves had not grown on the trees yet, so it just looked like a bunch of dead sticks sticking out of the ground. There were evergreen trees, and with those I was less disappointed and more curious, because there were groves of trees that I was looking at that were like 6 feet tall. They just stunted miniature trees. And there were others that grew 20, 30 feet, but they were only about 8 inches thick. So they would bend over like blades of grass, like the tree would be hanging out towards the road. And I was looking at these things and I had this thought, this association, and it turns out my wife had the same one. Both of us were thinking that those trees looked a lot like the artwork in Dr. Seuss. So ever since that first trip, we've called them Dr. Seuss trees. One of the fun things that I'm learning is that if you look at something in nature long enough, you start to see its beauty. I've been here 3 years now, and I kind of like the Dr. Seuss trees. But I've also seen enough to know that Alaska has a lot more than just Dr. Seuss trees. Alaska has some big ones of its own down in the southeast. And I love the birch trees. The bark peels back, and sometimes the sun will hit it just right, and it'll have this deep golden glow. I love the way that snow falls and lays heavy on the branches of trees, and how the frost will form in such artistic ways on the trunk of a tree. I love putting up a hammock between two trees and enjoying the peaceful setting. I'm so glad that God dreamed up the idea of trees, and He gave them to us with such variety and utility. We're going to hear some meaningful words about trees and the God who made them from Pastor Adrian Nekshu.
God is love. His nature, His law is love. It ever has been, it ever will be. This is the message of the Holy Scriptures. Do you want to know what kind of God we serve? That is the simplest answer. God is love. 3 simple words that reveal the essence of who God is. My question is, can we learn that from anywhere else? See, before we were given the written word, the Holy Scriptures, I believe God gave us another book. We call this planet Earth, nature, this environment that God created for us. I believe it speaks so clearly about the God that is the creator of everything there is. And see, we are told in the Scriptures that God created us humans in His own image. But I do believe that God created not only us in His own image, He created everything there is in His image. Today we're going to talk about trees and see, is there anything we can learn about God by studying the trees? They're beautiful organisms. They give us shade and oxygen, and we use them for different purposes. Can we learn something about God by studying the trees? I believe we can. There is a German scientist by the name of Peter Wohlleben, and he dedicated his whole life basically to studying the trees, the life of trees. And we are familiar with some of the processes that are happening within trees, the photosynthesis and other things. But he wanted to understand what happens underground. Is there something special happening underground? Well, his discoveries are just amazing. And I would say amazing, that's an understatement. He discovered that actually trees, they're capable, not that they're capable, but they do communicate with one another. In what way? Well, he discovered that the root system is connected. Trees are connected in a very interesting way. It's basically another species, not a tree, that it makes this connection between different roots. Mycelium, it is a fungus that connects all the trees. In what way? Well, the amazing thing is that basically there is a constant transfer happening between trees. Water, nitrogen, carbon, and other minerals are transferred from one tree to another. Usually it happens between trees that are doing really well and are healthy, and the ones that are maybe younger and they need help, or other trees that are struggling. The very interesting thing that they discovered is this transfer of nutrients happens not only between trees of the same species, it happens between trees of different species. So there is this constant transfer. It is basically a system through which the trees that are doing well and are healthy are helping the ones that are struggling and are maybe too young or not healthy. One thing they did, an experiment in which they injected this healthy, robust tree. They injected this tree with a very nutritious substance. And a few days later, they took samples from the nearby trees, and they discovered that that's how they discovered that there was a transfer that happened between that tree and the ones that were nearby. Isn't that amazing? Trees that are thinking of each other and collaborating and transferring nutrients from one another. Think of the little saplings on the forest floor. They barely get any daylight. They barely get any sunlight. And then you see them grow, and how? Well, that's the answer. The older trees, the mature and healthy ones, are helping the ones that are struggling. Isn't that amazing? To me, it sounds like science fiction. But no, this is how God created nature. And I'm pretty sure we know so little about nature, the environment we live in. Just recently, in the recent years, we've began to understand a little bit more about the beauty of God's creation. And there's so much more to understand. We serve a God that is a God of love. He is love, and you see that. We see that everywhere around us.
It's now time for our study guide, where we will consider 4 ways that trees speak of their Creator.